Get in the game with the college-branded Venmo debit card. Rep your team with every tap and earn up to 5% cash back with Venmo Stash, a new rewards program from Venmo. No monthly fee, no minimum balance, just school pride and spending power. Get in the game and sign up for the Venmo debit card at venmo.com/collegecard. The Venmo MasterCard is issued by the Bancorp Bank N.A. Select schools available. Venmo Stash terms and exclusions apply at venmo.me/stash terms. Max $100 cash back per month.
Are you stuck staring at your W-2? Are tax refund worries holding you back? You probably have FOMO, the fear of messing up. The fix? Using TurboTax on Intuit Credit Karma. They find every credit and deduction to help you get every refund dollar you deserve, or your money back. It's time to overcome your fear of messing up and get your taxes done right. Start filing today in the Credit Karma app.
For the News and Observer, I'm Korie Dean, higher education reporter and this week's guest host of Under the Dome. I'm joined today by NNO intern Sophia Bailey. Say hi, Sophia.
Hi.
All right, it's August, which means it's back to school time, and students are soon going to be walking the halls and quads of our state's colleges and universities again. But there could be a noticeable difference on campuses this fall, a lack or at least a decrease in the number of international students. That's because, as you've probably seen in the news this spring and summer, the Trump administration has enacted several policies and procedures that are making it more difficult for students to obtain visas. That could mean some students aren't able to make it to the U.S. or North Carolina in time for fall classes. Sophia and I took a look at this issue for a story package that ran this past Sunday in the NNO and is now available online at newsobserver.com. So to start, let's go back because there are some developments this spring that kind of set the stage for what we might see this fall. Listeners may remember that the Trump administration revoked the visas of more than 1,000 international students this spring with little notice or little explanation to the students or the universities. So Sophia, can you kind of set the stage a little bit more and tell us kind of what that looked like this spring?
Yes, so to start, I just want to make it known that I am a college student myself at the University of Florida, so I saw firsthand on campus what this looked like. It was definitely jarring, but not necessarily surprising. Keep in mind the Trump administration, when President Trump was in his first administration and entered office in 2016, we had the Muslim ban, as it was called, which focused on international students once again, specifically from Muslim-majority countries. And during Donald Trump's presidential campaign last year, he brought back the conversation of national security threats that international travelers, scholars, students bring to the country. So I wasn't necessarily surprised that his administration took a strong stance on revoking visas from students, especially because it seemed like most of the top headliner cases that made national news and headlines were related to students who were protesting the conflict overseas between Israel and Palestine. So that definitely took center stage and kind of added some oomph to the Trump administration's reasoning behind revoking these visas as a national security risk, or saying that these students threaten terrorism or were overall threats to the universities as a whole. I will say there hasn't been super clear guidance behind why every single visa has been revoked. I mean, as you said, about 1,000 is what we know of being revoked in the spring. Again, most of them have been placed back into effect now. So I think over the next couple of months, we're going to probably learn more about why, like, certain case studies of certain visas being revoked. But the majority of my understanding was visas were revoked related to the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Yeah, but even beyond that, here in North Carolina, here in the Triangle specifically, there were, I think, more than a dozen visas revoked, and that was at UNC, NC State, and Duke. And at NC State, for instance, that was kind of the first big high-profile case here, and I asked former Chancellor Randy Woodson about it kind of the day after this news broke, and he told me on the record that the students were in good standing, that they didn't know, there was no history of involvement with police or law enforcement that the university knew of. So anyway, so all of that happens in the spring. Like we talked about, the visas were restored generally like a few weeks later after that happened. But as we're looking ahead to this fall, there are other policies and procedures that were enacted after that kind of first development that are still impacting international students. For example, it's hard to get a visa appointment right now, especially for Chinese and Indian students. Representative Deborah Ross in Congress co-authored a bipartisan letter about this, urging the speed up of the visa approval process. But there are more developments, Sophia. So could you talk about kind of what some of those are, for example, social media vetting and the other processes that are now in place, and kind of what we learned in our reporting about how those new changes may impact enrollment this fall?
Yes. So I will point out two main contributors to what could impact student enrollment in the fall that I think is highlighted well in the coverage that we've done. And I think first, it's the travel bans. So there are currently 19 countries that the Trump administration has listed, 12 with full bans and then 7 with temporary bans. So although we don't have an exact number of how many students at our state universities here in North Carolina come from said countries that are either under total or partial bans, that could see an impact, not just in terms of student enrollment because of students who are from those countries, but also students who might be interested in pursuing degrees related to those countries or research or other activities that involve travel into those countries who might be opting to go to other schools, possibly in other countries, if the United States has those restrictions now. And then you also alluded to this with the visa backlogs and the application process getting very far behind for incoming students who are entering their first year at university and getting their visas for the first time, and those who are also, reapplying for visas or extending current visa statuses. There was a national pause between around mid-May or end of May, through roughly mid-June, I would say. And that even though that seems like only a month in the grand scheme of time, it did cause a lot of delays. And now we have students who are scrambling at the last minute, worried that they might not be able to make it back into the country in time for the fall semester. I did speak to UNC Chapel Hill Chancellor Lee Roberts last week and asked about this concern. And he said that, he couldn't go into specific details because things are developing on a daily basis. But he did say that faculty are trying to accommodate students who, want to learn at these universities here in North Carolina, but, it might just take them a little bit longer to get here in person. So we will see what happens with those students.
Yeah, and just kind of, we also got some email answers from Barbara Stevenson, who's the Chief Global Officer at UNC. She told us that UNC Chapel Hill has noticed lower weekly visa issuances since about mid-July. That may be due to that pause that we talked about. And similarly, Inside Higher Ed took a look at the most recently available month-to-month visa issuance data, and student visa issuances were down about 22%. And we talked to an expert, Clay Harmon with AIRC, which is an association of international enrollment managers. And he talked about that pause was really, that's like the peak of visa when students are trying to obtain that visa. So it was, in his words, unfortunate timing for when that happened. So again, we're looking at this heading into the fall. School starts in, less than 2 weeks at UNC and NC State, a little bit longer at Duke. So all of this is going to have an impact on the campuses. We've talked about enrollment may be lower, but it could also have long-term impacts. What we haven't touched on yet, and we can do after the break, is the economic impacts that international students have in North Carolina and the Triangle when they learn and study here, and then globally, kind of what international students mean to the country as a whole. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about that as well as some data points that we found in our reporting about the impact and what's at stake.
Hey, Fidelity. What's it cost to invest with the Fidelity app?
Start with as little as $1 with no account fees or trade commissions on U.S. stocks and ETFs.
That's music to my ears.
I can only talk.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Zero account fees apply to retail brokerage accounts only. Sell order assessment fee not included. A limited number of ETFs are subject to a transaction-based service fee of $100. See full list at fidelity.com/commissions. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE SIPC.
Hi, I'm Jim. I'm not an actor, just a guy living with prostate cancer. My wife and I face each day head on. We asked my doctor about Xtandi enzalutamide.
Xtandi 40 milligram tablets treats men with prostate cancer that has spread to other parts of the body and responds to a medical or surgical treatment to lower testosterone. Xtandi may cause serious side effects: seizure, a brain condition called PRESS, allergic reactions, heart disease that can lead to death, falls and bone fractures, swallowing problems, or choking that can lead to death. Stop Xtandi and get medical help at once if your face, tongue, lip, or throat start swelling. Tell your doctor at once if you faint, have a seizure, quickly worsening headache, decreased alertness, confusion, vision problems, chest pain or discomfort, or shortness of breath. Xtandi can cause harm to an unborn baby or miscarriage. Use birth control during and 3 months after Xtandi. Common side effects include muscle and joint pain, feeling unusually tired, hot flashes, constipation, less appetite, diarrhea, high blood pressure, bleeding, falls, fractures, and headache.
Visit Xtandi.com to watch my story.
You're listening to Under the Dome. I'm higher education reporter Korie Dean, here with NNO intern Sophia Bailey. We've been talking about international students and the projections that some experts have about enrollment numbers being lower this fall. So before the break, we talked about, again, those projections that enrollment could be lower. And we started to talk a little bit about the impacts international students bring here to the U.S. and to North Carolina and to the Triangle. So, Sophia, I know you looked at some reports about those. So could you talk about the impacts that they bring to the economy as well as more broadly when these students come live and work and study here?
Yeah, so first of all, annually, international student enrollment in the United States brings about $44 billion to the economy. So that's a lot of money there coming in from international student involvement. And that's not just from, tuition and fees. It's also, their contributions to working in the United States and renting homes and buying groceries and just being a part of American life. So it's not just their academic spending that applies to that $44 billion. It's everything else that comes with, living in the United States. So NAFSA, which is an association of international educators, released a report actually last Tuesday, trying to provide an update for a fall 2025 outlook because, again, as we mentioned earlier, everyone across all universities are scrambling to figure out what the long-term ramifications of losing or a drop in international student enrollment could mean for these universities. So NAFSA estimates that across the country, we could suffer a loss of $7 billion and 60,000 jobs from these visa restrictions, from the visa application backlogs, and from these travel bans, just everything combined that the Trump administration has really been focusing on when it comes to international students and their ability to come and study in the United States. So again, everything's gonna continue to develop. But I did speak with NAFSA via email and, asked when we might be getting another report and, when, a follow-up might be coming out. And that's to be determined, but stay up to date with the News and Observer because as things unfold, we will continue to provide updates.
Yeah. And one other aspect of this, we've talked this whole episode about international students, and that could be undergrad students. It's largely grad students, especially at places like UNC. But this could also impact faculty, international visiting scholars. So, Sophia, I know you wrote about that. So could you just touch on kind of what those impacts may look like?
Yeah, and I think this is really important because so much of the focus is put on students, which is a very important demographic, and the international student population, their contributions to the economic contributions that they make through their enrollment is really important. But we have to keep in mind, and through a lot of interviews that we've had for this project, I spoke with a lot of experts, faculty, staff, leadership at different colleges and universities who have really attested to the fact that international faculty, visiting scholars who bring that global mindset to North Carolina universities really are game changers. So it was Clay Harmon from AirC made the point that there is kind of this soft power, quote unquote, to international and visiting scholars from around the world who come to research and teach at these universities because they bring insight, intel from different countries, different ways of life that they can then contribute to a more global mindset, global standing across the country. There's also for faculty who aren't from other countries and are U.S. citizens and don't have any visa-related concerns. A lot of graduate students, or I should say, the majority of international students are graduate students. And there are different sectors and titles that graduate students fall under when it comes to whatever program or degree they're pursuing. But a lot of graduate students are research assistants to faculty and staff or to professors working on long-term projects that typically have a strict timeline with a designated grant allotted to said project. And if some of those grad students are impacted by any of these travel bans, visa restrictions, visa backlogs, then these faculty might lose important manpower in their studies and projects.
Yeah, definitely. I want to switch now, and we have two kind of higher ed themed. Mine is definitely higher ed themed. Sophia's a little bit more tangentially, but for our headliners of the week. So Sophia, I was hoping that you could start and talk about what is your headliner of the week?
My headliner is the fact that on August 2nd, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting announced that it will be closing after 60 years of service to the country. This comes after the rescissions package passed in Congress last month that made major cuts to public media funding, including PBS, NPR, namely. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and what the future of the news industry looks, especially for someone like myself who's entering the industry in the next couple of months full time.
Yeah, I mean, and, I said it was kind of tangentially related to higher ed. PBS North Carolina, which is an entity of the UNC system, announced on this day that we're recording this that they're going to offer buyouts basically to pretty much all of their employees because they get a chunk of their funding or they used to get a chunk of their funding from CPB. So keeping on the higher ed and Trump administration interactions or kind of clashes theme, I'm sure listeners are aware by now that the Trump administration's clash with higher ed and universities has come to the Triangle, Duke and Duke Health specifically. I was off when all this was happening, touching some grass in Western North Carolina, but if you have not seen, essentially the Trump administration has frozen $108 million in funding for Duke Health and Duke over kind of some vague allegations about what Linda McMahon and Robert F. Kennedy, two federal secretaries, are calling discriminatory practices. Of course, we've seen similar situations like this play out at Harvard, at Columbia, at a lot of other elite institutions. And now this has come to the Triangle, to North Carolina, with Duke being impacted. Duke was already feeling the impacts of the Trump administration. They made buyouts. Nearly 600 employees took the buyouts. Now they're starting layoffs on the day that we're recording this. So just, really interesting to see how this is going to play out. Duke has some time to respond to the allegations in the letter that Linda McMahon and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. sent to campus leaders. So we'll see how that plays out. All right. That is all we have time for this week. For the News and Observer, I'm Korie Dean. Thank you for listening, and we will talk to you next time.
For more from our politics team, subscribe to the News and Observer at newsobserver.com/subscribe. Sign up for our political newsletter, also called Under the Dome, at newsobserver.com/newsletters. Thanks for listening.